You guys haven't even heard me say anything. You're clapping. So it's only downhill from here. Well, thank you. This is my favorite topic to talk about, which is the financing and capital markets world of security and defense technologies. It's a very dynamic world. It's a very active world. It's a very challenging world. But if you were, as I'm sure will be stated, following the capital markets, the public markets for security and defense technology companies, it's quite a lively market today. The public markets are very embracing of technology companies in this sector, and frankly have been since 2002. We really only had one down year, which was in 2009 into 2010. And the down year both in terms of valuations in regard to the amount of capital raised by companies and also into the M&A market. But outside of that year, it's been a fairly straight arrow upwards. I think one of the meaningful changes that we've seen in the last 3 years, and will be no surprise hearing from the other panelists in the morning session. In 2010, for the first time, cyber received more venture capital financing than the physical security side of the house. And that tipping point has only been exaggerated since then. I introduced myself earlier, I'm not going to do it again, but I'm going to give a little brief overview of an index that we follow at Secure Strategy Group of small cap, primarily security technology companies. We don't do anything really in defense, but it's across cyber and asset tracking and video surveillance and incident management asset tracking, called the Unified Security Index, and I'll go 3 slides there. And then I'm going to introduce our panel here, which is made up of leading portfolio managers and analysts and entrepreneurs in the sector. I guess what I'll do is I'll introduce each one as we're handing off from one to the other. So I'll take 2 minutes here and just talk about the index that Secure Strategy Group has launched and has been following for about the last year. We only recently launched it because we wanted to make sure it was right and auditable and accountable and provided some level of forecasting capability. So the index is made up of 67 companies. All this information can be found on our website, by the way, securestrategygroup.com, and you can sign up there for these reports. 67 public companies across 11 different technology categories within security technology, all sub $500 million market cap. So they are, in my eyes, micro-cap companies, and some folks' eyes, nano-cap public companies, but they're small public companies. We consider them best of breed. To us, that means a review of management capability and track record, a review of the business model and the defensibility and scalability of that model, both to maintain pricing in the marketplace and margin, a review of the technology itself and how differentiated it is in the marketplace. And so we have a couple of different filters that we apply because there are several hundred companies that fit the parameter of security technology broadly or singularly and are sub 500 million. So we've picked best of breed across 11 different categories. As you can see here, the numbers are really quite exciting and impressive. After underperforming in 2012 across all the typical indices, 2013 was a strong year for this sector as it was for the overall market. But this group of 67 companies handily beat all the other major indices, as you can see. What's really exciting is that that trend has continued into this current year, and the gap in performance has only grown. So we're up 11.5% in this index through March 7th. I guess that was Monday or whatever it was. And we'll be launching this going forward, and you can receive more information. So, here are the 11 categories. Last year, 2 of the categories had more than 100% gains within the companies that were in that category. 9 of the 11 categories had positive performance. And that trend has continued into this current year where 9 of the 11 categories have positive performance and the other 2 are marginally down. Some interesting categories within this. In 2013 and even into this year, access control, secure ID has been a top performer. You've heard about it all morning. Whether it's biometrics or two-factor authentication, the overall theme of identity management is a predominant theme in this industry now across both physical security and cybersecurity. And you only have to look at the latest incident with the Malaysia airline to know that once again, as happened on 9/11, the issue wasn't on 9/11 a bomb being brought aboard. Maybe it was a Malaysian airline tragedy. The issue was access control, and people at the counter at the airports letting people on planes with either forged IDs or IDs that were real but were bought fraudulently. Somebody went to the DMV and got a driver's license. Comes back to access control. It's the same thing with the hacking and cybersecurity issues. It's access control. So this predominant theme of access control for you investors out there should be a part of your portfolio, at least the types of companies you're looking for, and it's borne out by the performance of these companies in the public markets. You can see cyber up 58% last year, up 14% this year. Cyber is where we were in the days of the internet, in the late 90s, early 2000s. It's a free-for-all, it's a land grab, really kind of tough to see what's real and what's not real, what can scale and what can't scale, because it's all so new. It's greenfield, it's a frontier. So, you almost can't cap the growth of these companies until the technology starts to get, vetted by the buying community. But this sector continues to be a very strong sector. This is my last slide, just to give you some sense of the top performers by name. I'm not going to go across any of these, but all I will tell you is that Secure Strategy Group knows each of these companies. The majority we know and have known for years, to the management, to the board. Some of them are clients, the majority have not been. But this is not an index to us by picking out names from a Yahoo Finance site that fit the category or fit the filter. We know these companies. We've watched them evolve for many years. We have a sense of how technology and business model and management and board have evolved. And I think that gives us at least a better feel for picking the right winners beyond what can be read in a 10K. We have relationships with these companies. I'm going to stop there and introduce our first panelist. KRIS TUTTLE from Soundview Technology Group is I'm sure many of you know his name. He's been a long time leading analyst in the technology sector going back to the mid-90s when KRIS was the axe on Wall Street in regard to this new sector called the Internet. He's had successful turns with Soundview. He now has bought back the name and is building the business. I've engaged KRIS on assignments for our clients to write research and provide visibility, and I think he's the best in the business, and I'm an analyst, and I'm going to give him credit for that because I really do believe he's the best. So, KRIS, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Scott. That's a wonderful introduction. I'm not going to talk a lot about what we do. We are research-driven, 120%, and we apply that in doing a little advisory work and a lot of published work, and we actually do some active investing as well. But fundamentally, it's about research. I think I'm preaching to the crowd, to the choir here, so I'm going to be brief with some of these, but I wanted to give you kind of a level set, a landscape on where valuation is, and talk a little bit about positioning at the end on the last slide to kind of give you a little bit of a roadmap to positioning. So to put it on one slide only, we talked here a lot about access control, authentication, and for us it's all about convergence. And the reason all this convergence is going on now and it's going to be going on for the next 10 years, 20 years, however you want to measure it. We've got supercomputers on our pockets, soon on our wrist or on our eyepiece. Everything is in the cloud. I have at least 100 different ID password pairs that I have to have a separate system to manage, which is also insecure. A lot of this stuff is good. The bad news is the Same technology is now on, for those of you familiar with the GPU. The GPU has, pick a number, they're all right, 100,000 times the processing power of Cray, 1 million times, 10 million times. But in the hands of a reasonably modest hacker, a bunch of GPUs can basically kind of crack any system out there. So all these things are happening at the same time. But what it means really is for security, it's about convergence. You heard Dennis talk about convergence with Viscount. And full disclosure, we advise Viscount as well as NXT on investor positioning, so we know the companies very well. But this is the key. There's no more separate, oh, we have IT over here, and we have physical over here. That's just not true anymore, and it'll be increasingly less true every day. So that's a huge, huge trend that really governs a lot of our work in security. We don't do so much defense, but a lot of this kind of work. Just to talk about valuation, it's been, we're going to look at a couple different sectors. We follow the IPO market pretty carefully. It's part of another business. But security companies have been hot. They are hot. Recently, they've gotten even hotter with companies like FireEye, which has got an astounding valuation multiple. I should probably add Varonis to this slide, even though they came public a couple weeks ago. They don't position themselves as security, but they really kind of are. I'll link to this presentation is at the end, so you'll be able to get it and look at these numbers. But I mean, these are you know, gigantic valuation multiples for these companies. So you're going to see more and more security investing, both on the emerging side, the public side, the private side, because the end game, whether you're acquired or whether you go public, if you can reach that scale, valuations are extremely attractive. Some of the old players have the opposite problem. They're orders of magnitude lower in terms of valuation. Obviously, there's some reversion to the mean that will happen if you're an investor. Some of these companies, you know, if you believe what BlackBerry's trying to do, you know, it could be pretty interesting if they pull it off. Essentially, with cash, you know, trading at nothing. So there's some pretty interesting stories potentially in that world. A lot of what we are focused on here is on these kind of smaller names. That's where we do a lot of our work on the advisory side. The two we're advising on this list are in italics, you might not be able to see it. But there's a huge range of valuations, and some of that's based on investor positioning, some of it's on really company execution or lack thereof. And Scott's list is way more exhaustive than this one, clearly. But you know, there's a lot of differentiation in terms of valuation. And I'm biased, but I really can say that investor positioning combined with your own execution and technology is essential for getting long-term investors to A, pay attention and even notice your company, and then most of all to actually own it and stay in it for a long period of time versus, you know, kind of a quick hit. So in conclusion, I'm just going to lay out a couple of these things and then we may touch these again in Q&A. We talk about authentication as part of this secure access control, whether it's biometrics, contextual processing, I think, is going to be a big one. That's, I would call N factor. We're talking in the hallway a lot about two-factor authentication. These are ideas for things that if you're looking for investments or your company looking to position your story, you know, things that you might want to consider getting into. We talked about convergence with Viscount. Clearly the cloud, mobile, and the software model is going to dominate there. As far as I'm concerned, I haven't seen another company doing what they're doing, so I think that is at least de facto leadership position. We'll see how they manage it. I thought the weird stuff was weird, but actually that DNA company that talked a little about their technology, provenance is basically knowing where someone came from, ideally across a long chain of events and changes. And in the digital world, provenance is like getting really, really hard. So it's an extremely interesting problem to solve. Not many people are focused on it. I didn't know that this was kind of their story. Obviously, they're kind of development stage, but provenance, some of those things, wearable, embedded, are another thing to position yourself for. And then finally, as you saw from the IPO slide, those are pretty conventional IT security companies. They might be focused on email or database in the case of Imperva, or or the network in the case of Palo Alto, or virtual machines in the case of FireEye. But the regular stuff still works, although I would argue that if you look at the valuations on a lot of the regular way security guys, it's just so high that it seems like a really good time to focus in on that group of what I would call the emerging smaller cap companies that have some really interesting technologies and some management teams and investor groups getting behind them where, I mean, these investments, these companies and their stocks, have the opportunity, albeit with lots of risk, to have, rather large returns over a 12 to 24 month period. So we're pretty excited about that. And if any of you have questions, we can move.
Chris?
Oh, and sorry, Scott. This is where you can get those slides if you want to look at the numbers or anything else. Go to soundview.co/infosec, and there's a link to the presentation there if you download it. And of course, you can contact me offline if you'd like to.
Our next panelist is MANISH THAKUR, who we've also known each other for a number of years. MANISH is with Hudson Fairfax Group. He's a managing partner there. He's been a long-time investor, entrepreneur, banker in the security, intelligence, cyber, big data space, working for big banks and medium-tier banks, and now managing his own principal investment fund. My favorite thing about MANISH, from my perspective, is the strategic approach he brings to investing. This is not a passive approach to sit back and give a company money and cross your fingers and hope things work. He's got a big network that he brings to bear on his portfolio companies that helps to increase the likelihood of success. So I guess I'll put it that way. Manish?
You know my story. You know my story better than I do. Hudson Fairfax Group, we were started a little over a year ago. As Scott said, we're a strategic investment firm. We focus only on a couple of areas: cyber, whatever, however that's defined, analytics, company providing the intelligence sector. We're based in New York, but we have offices in DC and London. And as Scott said, we're not just a financial passive investor. We count ourselves as being a sales accelerator. So the folks that stood up the Cisco Global Space and Defense Group are all within, or the main people are within the firm. We like to take companies that are on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe already gotten to 2 or 3, and then take them to the 10 in terms of sales. We only like to invest in companies that we ourselves can add to the sales pipeline within 18 months. We have, in addition to that, an advisory board that's very useful in helping us go source and diligence deals, all made up of C-suite people from DOD, NSA, FBI, CIA, as well as on the commercial side from Cisco, and then Deutsche Bank and Franklin Templeton, etc. So we're specialists in what we do. I don't have that slide. What I'm going to do is just talk for a couple of minutes as to how we see the development of the market and the investment opportunities that lie in there. I think everybody at this point knows that cyber is a growing industry. Nation state criminal gangs, terror groups, and activists, and bored teenagers. We've got a free-for-all going online, and that's not going to change. If I look at it in two perspectives, why do I think that's not going to change? One, Target, more than just a breach, Target became personal. For a lot of individuals, it became personal, and the minute that happens, it goes up on the priority list of IT spending. And that's one thing. On the corporate side, there's something else that's happened. It used to be that 5 or 10 years ago, InfoSec was the department under the responsibility of the CIO. Then it became the CISO. And as people began to realize there could be loss, it became the responsibility of the CFO. Well, now with the general counsel, people are worried about their liability. People are worried about this HIPAA business, what it's about, somebody suing you because my personal information is now out there. That's not going to change. The general counsels tend to have unlimited budgets when they have to solve problems. So I look at it from a personal perspective. I look at it from the point of view of corporates. This thing is not going to go away. So let's just leave that alone. I'm sure other people will have a concept of the industry. What is driving it? We care about what's driving the industry because that's where we see the investment opportunities. The biggest thing that interests us right now is the consumerization of IT. The decision points on IT have moved away from your IT department and you've taken them over yourselves. Whether that means your mobile phone, whether that means bring your own device, And mobile, by the way, does not just mean phones. It could be something that's wearable, and I know you just mentioned that. It could be your car. The whole definition of what mobile has changed. We're now talking about personal clouds. What does that mean? For authentication, people seem to be talking a lot about that. Or encryption. What does that mean? Let's talk about the cloud, the whole SaaS model. That's redefining the concept of the perimeter. Is there such a thing as a perimeter, or the perimeter just gotten bigger? How do we look at that? The other thing, we're very conscious of what's happening at NSA and Snowden. I think it has raised the issue of privacy. How is that going to be addressed? Data sovereignty, in the case of EU or Brazil. So there are a lot of things that are out there that are driving this industry. We try to look at those drivers and see who's going to address those, and who's going to win in that world. What exactly is a cyber company? Whenever we normally talk about that, we qualify and put that, the quote marks around it. We normally call it information security. And for us, that's not a company that just has the word cyber, fire, or cloud in it. Because it seems to me that if you add those names, you're going to increase your multiple. Well, that may work in the public market. It certainly does not work in the private market, and it absolutely does not work with us. The US government actually does have a definition, and I think that definition is interesting. It talks about protecting information security from unauthorized. Now, here we go. Access, use, disclosure, disruption, modification, and destruction. Wow, that's a lot of very different things. And I think that's the big point about cyber. It covers a lot of different areas. And again, we talked about firewalls and antivirus, which have been around for a long time. Next generation intrusion protection, network layer security, endpoint security. Let's talk about data analytics and then how do you make that more active defense, remediation. We're seeing lots of different areas. And again, from an investment perspective, all these areas are not created equal. Some are falling away, traditional firewalls, even SIMs. Some are getting overhyped. We argue that maybe mobile is getting overhyped right now. How many people here really have had mobile, an antivirus attack on their PDA? I'm not sure very many people have. On the other hand, you might have data leakage. Well, that may be where we need to be looking at. And some areas may not be ready for prime time. The Internet of Things, exactly how is that going to work with embedded devices? Unclear to us at this point. People talk about critical infrastructure. We worry about that. I know that NIST and other people are looking at that, but for us, as private equity, we look at it and say, look at the sales cycles of Con Ed. Well, how is a new company going to manage that? We don't know the answer to that. So some things may just not be ready for that. I know a couple of people have already talked about valuations. Valuations worry us a lot. The minute you start talking about revenue multiples, you've already changed the paradigm from when I went to business school. But we're seeing companies in the 6 to 10 times range. Some of the older companies maybe in the 2 to 3 times revenue range, and some of them at absurdly high valuations. Whether it's FireEye, Splunk, Tablet, even at the 6 to 10, even at the 3 to 5, people have to grow into these valuations, and we have to see that. And I'm not talking about the revenue number. Don't just look at the revenue line. Look at the expenses. Look how much being spent in marketing. Where's it coming out of the cash flow line? Eventually, they have to make profits. Eventually, they have to make cash flow. So we need, what I would say when it comes to valuation is buyer beware. Not all companies are going to grow to the skies, and not all sectors are going to grow to the skies. In terms of how do you play this sector, I think Scott's going to talk about that in a few minutes, but there have been about $1.5 billion put in about over 200 deals in the last year. That does not include M&A, which is much larger numbers. I'm talking about early stage private equity, late stage venture capital. That's a lot of transactions. So we know there's a lot of VC happening in the area. We know there's a lot of IPO coming in the area. We actually find in private equity, we're getting a little bit squeezed. VCs are getting later stage. A lot of companies are moving into IPOs sooner than maybe we feel comfortable. And we expect there'll be more of that going forward. Challenges in this area, technological change and obsolescence. This is an industry that's changing very fast. As the threat changes, the technology changes. A lot of Me Too companies. A number of companies have come up to me and said, well, if the NSA had just used us, WikiLeaks would not have happened. Well, the first time we heard that, we were pretty excited. The second time we were like, oh, we've got to think about this. And the third time we're yawning. So we had a lot of Me Too out there. And the other thing I would say is not just the high valuation, but the high velocity of transactions. It's the valuation is changing a lot. Something that could be a $30 million valuation one day, the CEO may come back with stars in his eyes and say, I'm actually now worth 400 million. Well, not to us tonight. So again, buyer beware. What we would say, if you're going to play in this game, is really know what you're doing. Look at the technology, and not just your own technology, the company that you're looking to put money into, but the competing technology that are out there, and what's coming down the rear window. Look at the product and technology roadmap. Get customer references. Nothing more important to make sure that the company technology works than somebody that's actually using it and using it successfully. And again, this may be a self-serving statement, partner with professionals. This is a very attractive industry. A lot of people are going to make a lot of money. But as Scott said, it's the Wild West, and not all trees are going to grow to the sky.
Thank you. Terrific. Next is a gentleman I've known of for years, but this is my first time meeting him, Scott SACKNOFF, who is the president of the SPADE Defense Index, which is quite a mature, well-known index covering defense companies, 50 different companies in a variety of different sectors within defense. It's the underlying index for the power shares, aerospace and defense ETF. So this is, through Scott's invention, a way that you can directly invest in a basket portfolio of defense companies. Scott.
I guess I'm the designated, shifting back to defense and national security. We've always looked at the cyber world and all of that more as, in a lot of cases, the local, whereas homeland security, national security is more of looking at the collective, as Manish said very, very well. It's definitely a lot of what's going on today is more personal. So I'm going to run through some, just some quick things on looking at security from the defense and national side of things, and then, as he mentioned, I came across some statistics on cyber, which I will be happy to share. So, normal legal disclaimer, because it's not going to work. So there we go. Since, as you mentioned, there is an ETF tracking the index, the basic legal disclaimers on that. So, as you can see, for past decade, defense as a whole has done remarkably well compared to the S&P 500. In going through statistics, we've got live data back to '97. We have unlive data back to 1980, which essentially shows that if you had invested in defense at any period of time into a basket of defense, at any period of time within 18 months, you would have recouped any decline that you would have seen. Even in the last year, when most people assumed that as we pull out of Iraq and Afghanistan, the defense sector would be hurting, remarkably, it was much, much better than I think anyone had foreseen. There were those who said declines, there were those who said commercial aerospace and international defense would make a difference, but I don't think anyone saw results that would have taken us to nearly 50% gains. The top 20 of the 50 companies in the index gained at least 52%, which is truly amazing. And that return has, and obviously, these slides, and that's continued for the through the current year. You can see that the top 20 go anywhere from 7.6 up to 36%, which is cyber firm, PW. Interestingly, with all the talk about defense in general, the entire market cap of all defense companies is barely above Apple, ExxonMobil, Google. You've got $603 billion spread among all of the companies. This is globally, you're dealing with a $1.3 trillion industry, roughly half of which usually is in the United States. Still only amounts to 4 to 5% of GDP, which is much below historicals. So as people have said, we spend more and more in defense historically, not compared since World War II at all. So some of the key thoughts on defense investing. You got to realize there's a lot of things that are very long investment cycles. You're dealing with when Department of Defense announces that they're thinking of something, you could have 15, 20 years worth of investment before they start switching to the next program that replaces it. Not all downturns are created equal. There's a lot of talk about how pullouts are really an impact, and this is something that people don't think about in depth when all these articles are being written. What happened after the fall of the Soviet Union is not the same as what's happening today. Back then, once the wall fell and you started having people talk about peace dividends, companies weren't prepared. They knew that something would happen probably eventually, but it really wasn't on their radar screen to say, we need to do something. And everybody knew that Iraq and Afghanistan was coming. So they were able to, over time, improve balance sheets. They were able to go and say, here's exactly what we need to do so that when the funding does shift, here's the parts we want in-house. Here are the parts we want to spin out to other entities. And the companies today are much, much healthier. Most people don't remember Lockheed Martin and Northrop essentially being bankrupt and being talked about merging in order to be able to survive. Through the course of time, obviously, the answer is I don't think anyone looks at either of those companies today and says that there's a problem. And the third thing is to identify future trends. Most of what happens when you're dealing with future investing, all of the defense sector is always a counter to the counter. Someone develops a tank, someone develops anti-tank weapons. Then they develop new weapons so that the anti-tank weapons don't work. You develop a C4ISR system, somebody develops a counter. You develop GPS for precision, they invent some way of blocking GPS signals. You now invent something that goes counter GPS. So if you're looking at defense from an investment standpoint or trying to figure out what the next hot trend is, it's not just saying cyber, it's great. What are people now doing in cyber? What do we see them canceling? The advantage that someone has with whatever technology is, and then what comes after that. As I said, it's always, no matter how you look at it, it's always a cycle on these things. You're dealing with every 20 years, there's essentially been something else. So World War I, aircraft, tank, machine guns. World War II, jets, missiles. Then nuclear weapon age. Then satellite systems, stealth technology, network-centric warfare. In 20 years, who knows? If you ask anyone 20 years prior, most of these things weren't really on people's radar. Somebody came up with the advantage, and then they just kept going back and forth and saying we need to improve and maintain those skills. Ultimately, you have on defense companies growing. Either rising defense budgets, there is really the rising ocean raises all boats in a lot of cases. There are supplemental budgets which never get met into the numbers. Even when we don't have a war that we're spending on, there are always supplementals that attach for specific projects. Outsourcing. As DoD tries to reduce the budget it spends in-house, there are companies that benefit from the money going outside. Obviously, the ones who said we're going to focus purely on outsourcing for Iraq activities, those are in decline because that entire area is gone. However, there's a lot of IT work and things shifting both out of DoD and in some cases back in away from the commercial sector. International is growing by leaps and bounds. Congress is more than willing for U.S. to be able to sell a lot of things overseas that 10 years ago they never would have thought we would get permission for. And part of it is that they're recognizing that this amount of money coming from all of these international countries are offsetting any declines that are happening and making a stronger U.S. and a stronger defense base. And internal diversification. Someone today had mentioned about that the defense companies were shifting into various IT and cyber things. And the funny thing is they've actually been doing that for a long time. The largest IT supplier to the post office is Lockheed Martin. Now, obviously, as they different programs regarding planes and ships and stuff, they can see that these are being tightened. They have shifted into a lot of C4ISR and cyber activities because that's where the money is, and it's easy enough for them to shift. Overall, you're probably seeing well over 100 deals a year, mostly small, under 100 million, mostly private. Usually, the large companies buy the small ones because the small one gets a contract, and that's how you buy the contract. That's how you buy the personnel. You don't have to spend $1 million on top secret clearance. You're already getting that already in-house. And you're getting technology capabilities, and that's how these companies are essentially not only surviving and thriving. And before I turn it over, just some statistics, because I had mentioned to Manish, I found this article that was summarizing some of the cyber stuff. Cyber IT budgets in 2013, 65 billion total, rising to 93 in 2016. 1.4 billion in 239 cybersecurity companies invested from venture capital in 2013. Those both come from CB Insights. There were 80 cyber startups that exited through acquisition or IPO at an average of 10 times return. And just among the deals we've had, FireEye raised $304 million, 5 months later, 10 billion market cap. Mandiant, $1 billion acquisition. Cisco, $2.7 billion purchase of SourceFire. And IBM, $1 billion on Trusteer. So obviously the answer is that aspect of security is very hot. Turn it over to, you can introduce my fellow RPI alumni.
Thank you, Scott. Well, maybe you could help me with Phil's last name then. So I'm just going to say Phil. If you could fill in. I'm talking to say Phil A. So, AGCAOLI? No. What is it?
AGCAOLI.
That wasn't even close. I can read his background though. Phil's been, and I just met Phil, he's been a long-term player in IT, startup companies to Fortune 25 companies. His bio reads that he's had 3 consecutive startups, successful startups. I assume that means an exit. I think we just have to change one thing in his bio, which is that he co-founded Secure IT, which according to this, he sold to VeriSign for $70. I didn't know if that allowed him to retire with the current interest rates with CDs, but I'm assuming that's $70 million.
All right.
Yes.
So, so the neat part about being on this panel is because I'm anchoring it at a finance panel, but I'm the technical person on the panel. I think what I'm going to talk to you about is just a quick overview for me right now. So I'm a technical business leader, meaning, I'm from the private sector. I buy the technologies that you guys are looking to invest in, right? So it's my eye, it's my vision of what we're trying to accomplish, what we need to protect, and that's where the investments are made with my company that I advise for, and I request from my CFO, my CIO, and the CEO of the boards of my companies. And then I report on how we're doing. And I've also had the pleasure with the VeriSign acquisition. So VeriSign, when IPO in 1998, they bought my company for $7 a share. That stock split 4 times at $2.59 at the time. Our $70 million acquisition became $1 billion acquisition within 2 years. And I was in my early 20s. And I was very fortunate because at that time, that was the beginning of the internet, the .com bubble in the mid-early 90s. And that's, my generation is part of the first generation that was on the internet. I've been on it since I was 8. I've been breaking into stuff since I was 10. And I just turned into my 40s. And at the end of the day, I've been fortunate because with these startups, it's brought visibility to the VC community. And so I work with the VC community. I'm a private investor. I support several VCs in Israel and in Silicon Valley as a security expert and as a technologist. And I think, as anchoring this panel, if you're not excited about the security business, you should be. Because in the mid-90s, part of the .com bubble, if you remember a company called Network Associates, McAfee, Intel, there was all these acquisitions, mergers, companies coming together, internet security systems, Checkpoint. These companies came out of nowhere with several $1 million, became multi-billion-dollar companies. I know the market cap is not where some of the large Apples are, but from a security space, these companies were, most of them were invested in half a million dollars. Like my startup, $500,000 became $1.2 billion within 3 years with my company. And I never told my parents. I just said, hey, we got bought. And it took my parents like 3 years. They're like, oh, you made a lot of money? I'm like, kind of. And at the end of the day, this bubble, you mentioned some names already, FireEye, Mandiant, 3 years. The cash infusion with that company, $250,000 from what I heard. $1.5 billion acquisition 3 years later, from FireEye after their IPO of $1.5 billion. And so the money is there. So I've been the Chief Information Security Officer in the private sector, at VeriSign, at Dell, at Cox Communications. I've secured Cisco, as well as really interested in that DNA supply chain conversation, Alcatel, and at GE and at Lockheed Martin. And I also represent the Ponemon Institute. So that's a research think tank, a global research think tank. They're known for privacy, data breach, data protection, cyber online trust. You know, they're widely quoted. One of the most widely quoted research is the annual cost of a data breach. So I'll give you some quick stats. You know, in 2003, the average consolidated data breach cost was about $130 per lost record. Equate that to Target at 40 million records and 140 million after the fact records. That's a lot of money. And you know, the reality is the research, it continues to indicate that there's a lot of momentum to invest in security. And we've had literally the last 5 years of heightened increased security expenditures post 9/11 in the cybersecurity realm that I personally have been investing or with a bunch of startups in a lot of these small cap seed funding opportunities, to get angel investment opportunities, because just like with FireEye is a 4-year-old company, and again, they just went out to shoot within a couple of years, multi-billion-dollar valuation. And you know, one of the other things I want to share as well is you know, there's been a lot of you know, conversation about cyber. So let me simplify it for you. We've heard a couple of different definitions, but I'm going to give you the one that's worked on just about every board that I've talked to or CEO that I've talked to. You know, cybersecurity, are you critical infrastructure? And the Department of Homeland Security in the U.S. defines 16 sectors. So that's the first gauntlet. Are you actually critical infrastructure? Are you a communications supplier? Are you financial services? Are you a bank? Do you provide oil and gas, electricity? You could be critical infrastructure. And then the other part that could really simplify the definition of cybersecurity is, do people rely on it? Do they rely on the internet to the point where it affects health and safety, causes a huge economic impact, and does it affect the national security of our country? I think if you keep cybersecurity's definition down to those two criteria, are you critical infrastructure? And you know, does something that you do, like let's take a look at Sandy that came and hit New York, right? One event, tropical weather pattern, killed a lot of people, caused a lot of economic impact, and it affected our national security. Hit all three. So I think the two big critical infrastructure of the country, electric, right? People could die, people did die, caused a huge economic impact to the country, and it affected our national security at the time because all of our defenses were weakened at that point. And so if you define it there, I'm actually going to go through my perspective as a technologist, what I think is kind of where the big investments are from a security perspective. So I went from low tech, and I'll go back to high tech. So really, my areas where I think it's, you know, there's a traditional outlook on cybersecurity that, and we've heard it earlier today, where physical security and IT technology come together. So this is in the form of like badge readers, identity and access management, biometrics. I'm very up on the payments. Why? Because, you know, who here doesn't have an iPhone or some type of Android smartphone, right? An iPhone 5 has built-in biometrics inside of it. It's got a thumb reader, if you don't know that. It's got facial recognition as well. There's software for that. The Samsung Galaxy S5, Samsung Galaxy phones are the #1 Android phone out there on the planet. The S5, which is about to come out any week now, is going to come built in with the same type of biometrics as the iPhone 5. And so built-in payments infrastructure is going to be built in, which has been a big limiter for companies wanting to switch to biometrics. It's going to be built into the hardware that's in your pocket. I'll give you an example. Who here does not log into a prominent internet site with a challenge response back from that site? Like you dial in and it should give you back like a PIN code. Again, nobody. So if you guys have a Facebook account or LinkedIn or Google account, if you don't turn it on, someone's going to hack you. Because this thing, you know, it's not just a user ID and a password. You log in and it calls you back and gives you another, you know, randomly changing passcode. It's built in, it's convenient, it's intuitive, it's free. That's the kind of stuff I invest in. I think that's the kind of stuff that's important to look at. The stuff that it's there already, and that's why I'm very up on the iPhones and the Samsung having built-in technology, because consumers, companies are not buying extra equipment, it's right there already. So where's the opportunity to make additional dollars? Well, there's, you know, Edward Snowden is at South by Southwest in Austin this weekend talking about encryption. Boom. You know, so encryption technology, vulnerability scanning technology. Can the hacker see what you're doing? Do you still have those same vulnerabilities? You got to fix those. Vulnerability scanning technology, still a huge investment opportunity. Application security, security scanning technology. So, right, I mean, the business world today works through apps, right? You log into a website, that's an application. Is it secure? No. And more companies are figuring out that they need to invest in application security practices. You know, privacy. People talk about privacy. A couple of key areas in privacy is data governance, data marking, and enforcement. And there are companies that are small startups that are in that space that do data governance, data marking, and enforcement. I repeat it because I think that's another very good, interesting area. I'm also a co-founder of the Cloud Security Line, so I love cloud. I think there's a ton of opportunities for cloud security and cloud companies. Big data and data analytics as well. And you know, we heard earlier, supply chain, risk management, and assurance solutions. So what that basically means is, right, so if President Obama comes in with his BlackBerry, what do you think the White House IT staff has to do for him to use that thing? Because before him, no other president was using a BlackBerry, was allowed to. He used it. I'll give you a sense of what I heard. So this is all, you know, conjecture, but from what I heard, they gave him a BlackBerry, but they had to take it apart. They put new chips in it. They validated all the software. Imagine having to do that for the entire White House staff. That's impossible. So, you know, hearing about these biotechnology type solutions, that's pretty cool. That's why I went walking up and got his card afterwards, because I'm interested to find out more. Because the companies that I serve, I have a supply chain criteria. When I was at Cisco, that's where all this counterfeit chip stuff started coming up. Circa, you know, 2006. I was at Cisco then. And then I went to Dell right after. And, you know, so supply chain, I think, is another, you hear solutions like that, that's an interesting investment. Mobile, BYOD, and I saved the best for last because, you know, we're all talking about cybersecurity, and one of my definitions is about, is it on the internet? And how does it affect all these other things? And I think there's a next internet bubble that's coming up, and it's drone technology. And earlier somebody brought up drones, you know, planes. No. Drones is any autonomous technology. I've seen amphibious drones. The Navy's launching all sorts of amphibious drones. There are terrestrial land drones. There are aircraft drones. And I'm on 2 startup boards for drone companies. That is the next. Think of it like watch TV. Everything is robotic. Everything is automated. Drone technology is the next freaking internet. I mean, this could be a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And the only thing that's holding it back from a commercial adoption is the FAA blocked it from commercial use up until next year. So I'm sitting on 2 stealth boards because when it all gets cleared by the FAA next year, I'm invested in it, and we're running as soon as the gates drop open. So drone technology, I think, if you have any opportunity to line in, let me know too, because I'm looking at all sorts of different drone technologies, video surveillance, telemetry. Besides the drone hardware itself, there's just tons of opportunity in the drone space.
Thank you, Phil. I have to learn how to pronounce your next name now. That was often impressive. Do we have time for a question? Folks, do you have questions for any of our panelists? Nothing? There you go. Roger?
So I'll throw the question back at you into the panel that you put out this way. You talked about drone technology. Where do you see, if you open the aperture even wider than that, where do you see the technology curve going and the opportunities for investment in the space that you've discussed in the other panels?
So the reason why drone technology is going to take off is because everybody has one of these smartphones in their pocket, if not 2 already. Well, guess what drives the drones? These things. Inside most of the drones is actually cellular technology because the CPU, the GPU, the hard drive, the internet connectivity, all of the controls are actually been miniaturized in cell phones. The GPS, right? So, and here's where I think that they're at. I think it's based on use cases. And I'll give you a couple examples, right? You know, albeit, you know, there's the Amazons doing delivery, right? There's the Prince and the King of Dubai. want to do delivery as well, so that's another delivery option. Like there's agriculture, there's emergency response services. You know, I'll give you an example because I just came from the telecom space, right? So in the telecom space, next time you drive your car, look out the window and look at how many telephone poles that you see. On average, when you see those big cellular poles, there's probably 2, if not 5 cellular companies on that pole. That costs, the maintenance to deal with that pole and the antennas, to deal with all the cellular so everybody can get their cellular wireless, costs about $150 to send somebody up that pole to do maintenance. Send a drone. Watch this. When Verizon sends a human being up that pole, they're going to knock over AT&T's wireless. So then AT&T's got to spend another $150 to go see what's going on over there. And so they're kind of beating each other up on who messed up my antenna. Send up a drone to do all that, charge them all one price. You've automated it, you reduced the cost. There's a whole other industry that replaced another industry. So the drone, the autonomous robotic industries that we're about to go into are going to replace old investments for new ones, but it's all new hardware, all new software, and guess what? It's all through the cloud, and it's all recurring revenue over the internet. So it's continuous revenue. And I think I just gave you some examples, microagriculture, the pole example. I mean, Georgia had an example last year where somebody tried dropping off drugs and guns over their walls. That also happened, I saw in Estonia last week, in Russia, in one of their prisons. There's a whole market for that. My startups may be doing stuff for both of those kind of use cases. So it's really around the use cases that I think they're the right investment. Like if it makes sense, and like, hey, that's smart. That's where the right investment is. And I think that's why, I guess it's a pitch. We need the right technology advisors to be kind of working with it to help, rationalize, hey, does this have legs? And what's the technical aptitude from what the technology is doing versus the old way of doing it.
So Scott, I liked your idea about what's the counter-counter technology. So let me put it to you point blank. What do you see right now where the Defense Department is, where their emphasis is? Where do you see the most interesting counter-counter evolution?
I like the fact that the guy behind you is shaking his head saying, wow, that's a broad question.
No, I had a question on that.
Yes, please.
In my line of drone technology, they're not monitoring the perimeter anymore.
Yeah.
They're going to be sending up predators, which is what they're already doing. And that's going to be predators going to be watching our borders, right? And so again, drone technology, there it is.
There you go. That works.
You know, the more I listen to this whole industry, it's a great place to make money going forward. But I don't see how on God's green earth we're going to be able to have privacy and in this industry as individuals. It's an impossibility because as you put in more security, you're going to lose privacy also. That's really what it gets down to. Would you disagree with that?
Do you think you have privacy now?
No, I had privacy when I got born at the beginning. You know,
So when do you think you
back
lost
in the
that privacy?
40s.
When do you think you lost that privacy?
When?
Yeah.
When I started the computer business back in the 70s, the personal computers,
Right.
and the internet started, that's when you gave up your security.
Right.
Actually,
So the reality, we're just talking about it now.
It's actually earlier than that. When did you get your first credit card? Do you notice in your credit card report, it's actually broken out by groceries?
Right, right. I
Who are
know.
they selling that to?
Oh, everybody.
Your privacy's been gone. Your credit card company knows exactly what you buy, where you buy it, when you buy it, and they can probably on a GPS tell you roughly where you go and sell point ad sales anywhere you go.
And just remember, there's a difference between privacy and abuse of privacy.
Remember Minority Report, Tom Cruise walked into the store and said, "Hey, Mr. Yamamoto," because he's wearing his other guy's eyes. Because he walked in, scanned his eyeballs, and then started selling to Mr. Yamamoto.
There's a funny book, it's old now, called How to Be Invisible. And what's fun about it is, I skimmed it, but basically it would be, if you want privacy, read this book, it tells you how to do it. Privacy is your full-time occupation and job. Because you can't get mail, you can't buy anything. I mean,
But the book tells you it's a recipe on how to do it. It's doable. But literally, you would spend your life trying to be private. So the answer is zero.
Bottom line is, whatever you develop, somebody else can hack into or break down. Excuse me. And the bigger problem is, if you go back to the 70s, let's say, it took a period of 5, 10 years before you broke into somebody else's ideas and broke it down. Nowadays, it takes months. That's about it. So whatever you seem to develop, somebody else breaks into it.
No, from an investment perspective, actually, you bring up a good point. The way that the industry is looking at this is data retention policies. A lot of companies now are worried about NSA and other agencies asking them for information. And what they're looking at is saying, okay, well, NSA, you can ask us, and we are obliged by law to provide it to you if we have it. So there are certain things that I've begun to notice a trend that really is very recent, where some people don't want the data or don't want to keep the data because it hurts their business model to do so. So we're going to get a balance at some point, but I was at RSA last week, 2 weeks ago, the challenge that we're seeing right now and the fact that people are talking about it means that there's going to be a debate in this country, and at some point there are going to be opportunities in that field.
Yeah, well, from an investment perspective, I mean, people have known that, Google's privacy is questionable, your privacy on Google, but their services are so compelling and convenient, and the best that's out there, people still use it. And the reality is, it's a stickiness that's out there based on, hey, it just afforded a certain life. And, I mean, Google was on that, $600 billion market cap list. So the privacy is here to stay, but people aren't ignoring it. People are pretty much ignoring it at this point.
That's why I say it's a great industry to invest in, but don't expect privacy. I understand.
And Scott said it well too earlier. I mean, the beauty about security, people have always asked me like, hey, when does investment in security end as a CISO? And I'm kind of like, it never does. I go, crimes happen since, Adam and Eve, right? They stole an apple. And so crime's going to happen forever. And it's going to be, measure, countermeasure, and it's going to be a cyclical battle forever and ever, and the investments will be there consistently.
The other thing to do is keep your eyes open for what's happening overseas, because I can remember being in France like 8 years ago, and every credit card had a chip on it. Now all of a sudden it's the solution to all the data hacking, and sometime in the next 18 to 24 months, every single person here all their credit cards will be thrown away, and you'll have the chip that has essentially the dual modes of security, both for having the chip and the ID numbers.
So remember it's March 11, 2014, right? So October of 2015, EMV, chip and PIN, or chip and signature are going to be instituted by the card brands next year. So it's 3/11/2014, 10/15 EMV chip, which is the stronger credit card is coming. Mark my words, in 2016, you're going to hear there's a rash of online fraud. Because what the EMV, if you read EMV security, I'm a security guy, all it's going to do is push it from the point of sale and the merchant to the online. And so it's going to push those attacks there. So, I mean, again, point counterpoint, that's what's going to happen.
Same thing happened in England when they implemented the chip and PIN.
Yeah.
The POS fraud went down to 0. CNP fraud went up to 70%.
Exactly. Well, and that's why we don't hear huge data breaches for card thefts in outside the U.S. It's always the U.S. where it's like, what's wrong with us? It's because we're the only ones still on Mag Stripe credit cards. That's why. Once we go EMV, it's open house on the world when it comes to online attacks.
Phil, you mentioned about drones fixing cell towers. Has there been any testing on that, or is the technology going to be drawn from outer space when you have these machines fixing things in outer space?
So the stealth startups I'm on, they've been doing tests. Yeah. They've been asked by different companies to start evaluating, giving proof of concept. They're paid research fees, so they're not violating commercial no drone laws. They're just flying their remote control helicopter, and they're bringing back their video feeds. And so there's a ton of stuff going on. In fact, 2 weeks ago, a judge in the NTSB, the National Traffic Safety Bureau, actually said that it was okay to fly drones commercially. The FAA came back and actually countered it. So for a day I was tweeting gloriously like, hey, we're going to start making money today. But there's various use cases. People are applying stuff. If you look, there's a lot of videos on YouTube and on Vimeo where people with drones, media is using it. Think about, if you guys watch the Olympics, think about, like I was watching the Alpine and the cross-country races. A drone following the athletes would have been easy. Just fly it along and video them. So there's tons of applications, the media space, tons of commercial applications. I don't know all of the applications.
Another question for you, and I heard this also with low Earth orbit satellites 20 years ago. This is not new. What's the value creation? Who's going to benefit from that?
So I don't know if you guys saw the news on about Facebook. They're trying to buy a drone company. The drone company that they're trying to buy has drones that I think can fly for like 5 years straight without ever landing. And their goal is they're going to send the drones to Africa. I forgot who talked about Africa earlier, but what they want to do is they want to expand mobile broadband to Africa. So there you go. I mean, drones flying around in the sky autonomously serving up high-speed internet. That's a neat investment. I don't have the dollars. That's some big bucks for telecom willing to do that, but that's a neat investment.
One problem with that is part of the show.
limitation on hunting in Africa, they can shoot.
Yeah, but they've been proposing that since the mid-90s for multi-year drones. NASA was researching in Stratasys or something like that. Stratasys, and there was a balloon one.
But no, I want to answer it to you. So here's the beauty about security, because it's spy versus spy. It's measure versus countermeasure, right? Fine, you try to shoot down the drone. Okay, Google, because this has been out in the news the last like 3 months, but the U.S. has started, no, not the U.S., France and Israel is starting to put laser countermeasures on their jets. Because people are trying to shoot down jets. Think about a laser versus a traditional, so I'm not a guns, guards, and gates kind of guy, security guy, but I get it. Instead of carrying bullets and armaments, all you need is a laser. Because all that is energy. And then you fire it. You don't have heavy payload, and you're shooting stuff. We're in Star Wars. Like literally, all of what I dreamed of as a 6-year-old, as an 8-year-old, it's here right now. We're in the future right now. And so, like to your point, like fine, they're going to go put those drones out there, and people try to shoot them down. They better defend. The people on the ground shooting better be able to have defend from a laser.
What do you dream about now?
We're in a financial investment conference. I do have other dreams of stuff. Today, the investments are here. I mean, you turn on TV, a lot of that stuff is about to come to life in the next 20 years.
I missed the last episode of Flash Gordon in 1946. That's why I don't know what's happening today.
Have you seen anything on the other side of the coin which is measuring intentions? Clearly there are issues about capabilities, there are issues about profiling, but I know in Israel people use subliminal messages to check white crime or even terror. When they ask you a naive question, in the Israeli airport, you got those cute young women, they ask you a question, did you pack this suitcase? And I thought, what kind of stupid question? They say from how you talk, they detect if you're a liar. Now, subliminal messages, obviously, you don't even need to lie because you don't even know what question are asked. But if you plan to, I come from banking, if you plan to really rob your bank or steal IP and sell it to the Chinese, they send you subliminal. It's not a proof, but at least out of 100,000 employees, you zero in on those who respond funny to those kind of messages. Have you seen any of that?
Actually, I have, and that's in the analytics area. So I've been to Israeli airports as well, and I've had the same questions, not the other one maybe, where they are asking the same question. And I actually spoke to some friends subsequently who had the Israeli government. That was a really stupid question, and they said, well, actually, that's not true, because 80% of the people who ask that question would think that's a stupid question and get annoyed. But if you're not getting annoyed, then we're worried. And that's actually what we're doing now in big data analytics. We're looking for patterns of behavior. We can see patterns, we can see patterns changing. And so what you're often looking at is the hunt for bin Laden was that it was looking for anomalies. that's going on right now. Full house.
You know, one quick point on that is, I forget what presentation I was at last week, but there's one company that was looking at data for fraud, and their point was the single biggest predictor of credit risk or fraud was looking at your mobile device, where you were physically hanging out, or which other people you were hanging out with. So they can predict with almost 100% accuracy a fraudulent transaction based on, and you can picture people who are going to commit fraud, you know, they go to a different bar than you, typically. And they were saying, you know, these patterns of behavior that we can detect when someone else has your phone or your smart wristband or whatever is going to be your authentication device, I haven't seen it applied very much in the real market yet, but they clearly got the analytic evidence to say we can be pretty smart about picking up clues that are not overt.
Obviously, there's a lot of that inside the Department of Homeland Security, the CIA, NSA. There's a lot of that activity that goes on.
Yeah, but you know that where it leads though, it's the consumer space, because anybody who have an Xbox 360 or Xbox One with a Kinect camera on it for your family, in the EULA, there's actually buried inside the end user license, it actually says that you allow them to send back a count of the number of people that are in the room. So inside that camera, it actually, when it's sitting there in the front of your living room, it actually can start telling you how many people are in that room. Think about that with your phone, camera here, camera there. I mean, I'm not going to go far into it, but think about when you're in the bathroom. There's a camera there, there's a camera there. So if you look at the Kinect strategy, I mean, the cameras, wherever they're already doing stuff, and there's companies that are on the private side, like Microsoft, that are already using that data for something.
Yeah, just remember on one of the, let's call it the hot markets, it's supposed to be over the next 10 years, deals with geolocation. So if they're already keeping track of the data of what you're buying and they know you happen to be on 53rd and 6th and you bought shoes 5 times in the last 2 weeks at Zappos and say, oh, by the way, the shoe store is having a sale. That's where a lot of the analytic stuff is going. So, you know, it's the same, let's call it underlying technologies that are used for the, did you pack your own suitcase? Which, by the way, for 30 years I've always wondered why I was asked that. And now I finally have the answer. So.
Guys, we're going to finish up. Thank you to KRIS, to MANISH.